Hi there, this is Eugene Blanchard, and I'm going to talk to you about a project I built a couple of years ago. I picked up a stereo console. It's very similar to this one, not quite the same. I'll show you a picture of it in a sec here. Why I like this picture is to show you the speakers that would come with a stereo console like this. It's typically back in the 50s, these were tube amplifiers, and maybe early 60s were the last ones that were made, is that they would have three amplifiers, three tube amplifiers. One amplifier would be the left channel. You'd have a mid-range and a tweeter in it. Another one would be the right channel. You'd have a mid-range and a tweeter also. And then you'd have a woofer. So a third channel would be the woofer channel. This was before subwoofers. Now what's interesting is the placement of the speakers. Is normally you want the mid-range and tweeters as high up as possible. Well, they just kind of threw them in the corner here. And over here they threw them here. And the reason they had it kind of awkward is that you had the electronics and the turntable was filling up this portion. So they just kind of put them down here. And then the woofer. On the back of these stereo consoles, they'll typically have a sticker, and the sticker will tell you what the model number is, and it'll also give you information on the tubes on it. Right? Typically, there's two chassis. One chassis will be the amplifier. This is the amplifier, and the other chassis will be the AM/FM radio receiver. And it would also be you would also have the things like volume controls and bass and tone controls and input for the record player and things like that. If you take a look at the amplifier portion, and this is the part that I was interested in, it shows that it has three transformers. This is the left audio amplifier transformer, the right amplifier, and the bass amplifier. And they used a tube called the 6BQ5. So they had one 6BQ5 for each one of these channels. Each 6BQ5 is about 6 watts output. Right, so a nice clean 6-watt output. So if we go to look it up on the internet, there's a site called the Radio Museum. You can put in your tube information. I put in 6BQ5 here. It'll tell you all the information about it. 6BQ5 is the American designation for it. In Europe, they called it the EL84. Very common tube used on guitar amps, and I've been very interested in guitar amps, so I was familiar with this tube. It'll also tell you the power ratings if you clicked on here, and they're about 6 watts, a Class A amplifier. So here it says 5.7 watts output. If you use two of them, you can get up to about 15 watts in what we call the push-pull configuration. Some of the things on the back of a stereo console, it'll tell you what the model number, and what you can do is you can go to some place like Pacific TV, and what they'll have is radio schematics, right? So you can look down here and it'll has lists and lists of different radio schematics, and you just look up for the one that you have. My model was a RCA SHC 663, I believe. So I was able to download it, and so this is what the cabinet actually looked like. It was this big long one here, right? So it was called the Copella, and then there's 4 different models. Interesting, a lot of these RCA cabinets and Electro-Home cabinets were manufactured in Canada, in Ontario, and if you were an electronic stereo manufacturer, typically what you had is the electronic side, which was the tubes and vacuum tubes and that, and then you had the cabinet makers, and they would go to great extent to make these beautiful cabinets and have all different models. If we look at the service manual, we can look at the music power output. So for the SHC 661, which is my model, it was 18 watts. It was 3 channels. You had your left, your right, and your bass channel, all of 6 watts each. Now the one to get was the SHC 663, which was 45 watts. You had 15 watts per channel, right? So I think this was it here. So if you see one like this, that's the one to grab because it's got the higher output. Regardless, it's amazing how much power you can get out of just 6 watts per channel on that. So what it'll do is on the repair manual, it'll tell you this is the tuner section, AMF tuner, and this would have your volume controls, your volume on-off, tuning, function, and you also have some tone controls. It'll show you the layout of the power amplifier. This one shows the high power one. We've got 6 6BQ5, so you got a pair for your bass, a pair for your left and right channels, a huge power transformer, filters, and that. if you're interested in working with the AMF side, you could have the alignment specs. This is the chassis for the one I had. It'll have a power transformer, then it'll have your rectifier tube, then you'll have a couple preamp audio, and I'll show you the audio inputs here, and some other things. You have your pilot light and phono power cord and plug and extra stuff like this. It'll have schematics. This is a schematic for the tuning section, not interested. Here's a schematic for the nice model that's 15 watts per channel. And it'll have all this information. This is the one that I have, right? So we can take a look at it and see you have your left and right channel. The right channel comes up to its own little preamp that'll run your power to your transformer and out to your speakers. They take a combination of the left and right and then run it to a preamp to another amplifier, and that will go to your power, and that'll go your bass channel. So they take and there'll be some filtering on here, so just the bass goes through, right? So maybe this is the filtering here, and then you have your left channel, which is identical to the right. You have your rectifier, you have your voltage input, your power transformer, you have your high voltage, this is your filament, right? And then you have your different taps that go off to it, and you have a plug here that goes for your speakers, right? So you have a left-right plug, and that would plug in your speakers. So we have that information that's available to us. When I opened up the cabinet, what we had is this really nice big 10-inch woofer, right? You don't need a big magnet on it because it's only going to operate around 10 watts or so. So the woofer cone was actually in exceptional condition, considering it was probably 50, 60 years old. Oh, at least maybe 60, 70 years old. It had what we call the mid-range speakers. They look like car speakers now. And then they have a couple tweeters, and you got your filter caps on it. So I thought, hey, this is a pretty good basis to start. Here's the power amp out. It was a little bit rust spots, all surface rust spots on it. I cleaned that up, and I was putting it on the bench to test it. Right, so right over here is where you'd hook up your speakers. So there's a little plug in here. And I took a look at the chassis when I flipped it over, and you can see that there's a capacitor that's burnt out. I went through and I looked at most of the capacitors were quite old and they were bubbled, so if you look on the edges it was kind of bubbled here and here. So I replaced a lot of these caps. Some of them were wax capacitors. I also cleaned up the wiring that I didn't need, like I didn't need a pilot light on, and I tested it on the bench, and here's the bench setup. I went directly from a little CD player. I was playing the Allman Brothers and ran it directly in. It didn't really have enough power to drive this. What it really needed was a preamp to get the level up. Of course, there's no bass or tone controls, and that was when I was working as an instructor in the lab. We had some speakers I was using, and then I was using this Sony speaker as the woofer, and had all 3 channels going. Once I verified that the amp was all working fine, all the tubes worked, I tested the tubes. I cleaned up the chassis. I had mentioned earlier that I basically cleaned up all the unwanted wiring. I didn't need any wiring that went to the AM/FM tuner section in that. So I added a pilot light on the front and a volume control, because it didn't have a volume control. I put the left and right inputs over here. I had some RCA jacks. Put a speaker connector strip on here because it used to connect up to here. I put an on-off switch, a little toggle on-off switch, and put a fuse on it so that way it was safe. So back in the days, this was only a 2-prong plug on it, so I put a 3-conductor connector. So you have your neutral, your hot, that would go to your fuse, and then also grounded the chassis to make it safe. I painted the chassis black, and this is what it looked like from the back. Here's my fuse, my on-off switch, my speakers. I had a common, and then bass left and right. Then you have your input with your RCA jacks on it. Cut up the original stereo console, and I used pieces from it. So this is pieces from the box. This is what it looked like from the front. I had my pilot light. I had a jeweled pilot light on it. I had my volume control with a sort of an old-looking knob on it. And on the front of the cabinet, it had this stereo orthophonic high-fidelity emblem on it, so I thought I'd put that on here. And this is just extra cabinet material that I basically put together. And then I had some of this extra decorative metal panel I put on, and it kind of looked nice. So I made a speaker cabinet. Again, all the wood that you see here was used from the original console. I put my woofer in, and I put my left and right channels on here, and then I filled this up with fiberglass insulation to dampen the bass on it. So when it was done, it actually looked like this. So this is the original grill cloth material. We had this nice little unit. Over here, this is what it looked like from the backside. Everything was pretty well all original. It actually sounded amazingly good. I hooked up a little stereo mixer I had and ran my cell phone into the stereo mixer. Then I had my volume and bass and treble controls and equalizer that I could run, and this actually sounded pretty sweet. I didn't have any place for it. I sold it for a couple $100, and the guy was just blown away with it. He really liked the sound of it, and it looked really nice. And that's the story of my vacuum tube stereo amplifier that I built. Thank you for watching.